Buongiorno, this is Tan Yigitcanlar of Queenstown University of Technology. Greetings from Brisbane, Australia. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen reasons, I won't be able to be with you physically today. First of all, I would like to thank organizers to putting together such an important event in a very timely manner where climate change, environmental issues, economic, social problems, governance, corruption-related issues have become dominant in the daily lives of many around the world. As we go through the Anthropocene area, where human impacts are tremendous on our well-being, flora, fauna, and the planet itself, having a sustainability goal and adopting life cycle thinking is critical. I particularly thank Giuseppe and his team putting together such an important event like this summer school. Secondly, I wish all the participants of the summer school to have a great knowledge exchange moment. Beyond this, I wish you the best time and have a great ball during this summer school activity. I remember one of my fondest memories was from a summer school in Turkey organized in 1997. These are the great opportunities to network, knowledge exchange, build friendships, and also learn professional ethics and collegiality. So I'm sure at the end of this summer school, besides technical knowledge and understanding on the concepts related to sustainability and life cycle thinking, you will be taking a lot of lessons and experiences home. I wish you all the best. Ciao. Presently, the term smart has become a popular concept, particularly when it gets to cities, communities, technologies, infrastructures, and services. In this presentation, I focus on understanding what smart cities are and whether they do really lead to sustainable outcomes. In order to address this issue, the first part of my presentation will focus on the conceptual dimensions of smart cities, and the second part I will undertake some empirical research and present its findings to the audience. At the beginning of the 20th century, that is 1900, the world was hosting 2 billion population. So this cartogram on the top shows the distribution of the 2 billion population across the globe. A little over than a century after, at present time, the population had a over tripling effect and reached to 7 billion. And the lower part of the slide has illustrated the distribution of the human population all across the globe. And you will see this slide that particularly all across the world there is a significant increase in the population. For the first time on the human civilization, it was 1800, beginning of the 19th century, that a world population reached to 1 billion. As shown in the previous slide, at the beginning of the 20th century, 1900, there was a doubling effect. In 100 years, the population doubled to 2 billion. And the growth of the human population continuously increased. In less than 75 years, the figure doubled to 4 billion in 1974. And from then onwards, almost every 10 to 15 years, the population added on an additional billion, reaching 7 billion in the recent years, and we expect the population growth to reach to about 8 billion in the next 10 years, and by the mid-century, the figure is estimated to 9 billion, and by the end of the century, going up to 12 billion people. When we look at actually where those populations are residing, we notice that mostly it is the metropolitan parts of the world, urbanized areas of the world, in particular the mega cities of the globe, are hosting those 7 billion plus population. Megacities can be defined as urban clusters that are hosting more than 10 million population. And within this framework, when we look at in recent times where those megacities are located, we see that, as in this slide, that more than half of them are within the Asia region. And this is to say, 21st century is the century of the cities, but at the same time, according to some, 21st century is the century of Asian cities. The origins of the humankind dates back to 300,000 years, according to the latest research, which previously was generally accepted as 200,000 years in the making of ourselves, starting from Homo sapiens. Compared to this 300,000 years, where our Earth is around 4.6 billion years old, our existence particularly started to have a negative impact on the rest of the planet during the last 200 years, where our civilizations in a modern sense started to be formed only 10,000 years ago. So the most recent era in terms of geological time scale is named as Holocene Era, and the other name for this Holocene era is Anthropocene Era, where we can also call it the age of humans. And our impacts in the short history of human life, particularly during the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, have a tremendous effect on the rest of the inhabitants and the planet itself. I'm sure some of you might have read the book called The Sixth Extinction. This is a remarkable story of how in such a short period of time we as humankind started to have a massive negative impact on the planet itself. But this wasn't the first extinction. Our planet have faced 5 previous cycles of mass extinction. The first one was for about 400 million years ago, followed with another 100 million years later, another one, and pretty much every 100 or so million years, the Earth faced a major extinction. And in each of these cycles of extinction, between 70 to 98% of all kind of life forms have been wiped out from the face of the planet. And probably the most famous one was the Paleogene extinction event that took about 65 million years ago and resulted in the end of dinosaur dynasty. Today in the Holocene, extinction is evident. The research has shown that the loss of biodiversity is a major threat to, again, over 70% of the flora and fauna. Today, the threat of extinction that our planets are facing, for example, like as in the slides, it's not only limited to bird species, mammal species, flora, and marine turtle species, and amphibian species, but also 75% of the water fish populations are under major threats. And along with this, 75% of the agriculture crops are similarly under a major threat. And this slide is a simple presentation of the damage, the relationship between the externalities, our externalities on the environment and our population growth, which is highly positively correlated. As the population I mentioned earlier reached 1 billion in the beginning of the 19th century, we were only covering up about 8% of the terrestrial area of the world. With this 8% of the terrestrial area occupation, we were giving externalities by making local ecosystems to have fewer species than before for about 2%. So use of 8% of the area and 2% of ecosystem loss. Century later, population reached almost 2 billion, and our occupation on the surface of the earth reached to 17%, and the damage was loss of 5% local ecosystem. A century after that, population reaches to 6. It's a tripling effort for the first time in 100 years. We started to occupy a massive, almost 40% of the Earth's surface, land surface, and ecosystem loss reached about 14%. Now, we have two options ahead of us. First one is to continue as business as usual for the next century. So for the next 100 years, we can continue the way that we grow, careless to the environment and sustainability needs, and increasing the land surface used to up about 50%, and that would eventuate in the population increase of 9 billion and population increase of 12 billion, and because another ecosystem loss of 17%. Or we can choose a green future alternative through following sustainable urban development goals, linking life cycle thinking, and even bringing down the land we occupy from 40% to 33%, and this way the damage we would give to the ecosystem would even decrease to 11-12%. The choice is up to us. The impact on the Earth's surface is tremendous, but beyond this, the marine ecology and impact of our externalities on the marine life is even bigger. Current research indicating that within 3 years' time, 2020, the number of plastic waste in forms of plastic bags and water bottles will exceed the population of fish in the oceans. Given the importance, critical importance of ocean on the balancing climate activities, continuing business as usual and continue giving damage to the marine ecosystem will result in much better catastrophes than we are facing today. For many, technology has been seen as a useful panacea to provide solutions to the ills that we have created. Today we are surrounded with various technological systems, providing opportunities for our cities to maintain its infrastructure and services, govern better, for individuals to access to social networks, learning through online education platforms, doing business online, having better quality and easy access, health and other services. Combination of all these technologies, which they are referred as the smart technologies, creating a new city ecosystem that is generally referred as a smart city ecosystem. In other words, the technologies surrounding our cities, to a degree, making them more smarter. Smart buildings, smart infrastructure, smart energy, green energy, smart mobility through electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, transports more active and green, creating major infrastructural opportunities for our cities to become more and more sustainable. In the major domains of urban domains of transport, environment, infrastructure, utilities, buildings, and life, there are a different variety of technology solutions, or call it smart solutions, are being used. And those cities in the recent times referred to smart cities. In order to turn our cities into smart ones, a number of organizations and state and federal governments have started initiatives. And probably one of the most known and popular initiatives that to create a smart city framework is the European Union's 10 years old smart cities framework. And this popular framework brings together the main domains of governance, environment, living, mobility, people, and economy at the heart of the policy making in the European Union cities. Similar to that, with a different twist, in recent times I have developed a smart city framework as well, which I'd like to present it pretty quickly to you. I place the key drivers of smart cities at the heart of this model, which is government and policy, making technology itself, along with the users' communities. So they form the major drivers of the smart city initiatives and success. And smart city success should be measurable. And in terms of evaluating the progress of smart cities, in my framework, I proposed 6 major performance areas: productivity, sustainability, accessibility, well-being, livability, and good governance. So along with the drivers and performance areas, this approach encourages smart city formation. One aspect of the smart cities seems to be at neglect, which is the safety, security, and privacy issues. Today, technology is providing us various opportunities and to a degree making us highly dependent on it. And this is a sort of vulnerability as well. Without better understanding technological risks, we are highly vulnerable to the potential problems we could face. This is Mark Goodman's very good book on talking about future crimes, which is around us, which is today's crimes. You are highly aware of the, for example, ransomware hacking activities going on across the globe in many corners. Perhaps one day, with the further advancement of technology will solve its own problem. For those who doesn't know, the Minority Reports is a great movie on Tom Cruise trying to catch the bad people before they actually create the crime by looking into big data and estimating their future evil activities. I have referred to smart cities in the last few slides, but haven't defined it yet. The next couple of slides, I will be focusing on talking about what actually a smart city is. In the literature, there are a variety of definitions of what smart city is. And these definitions ranges from solely technological perspective to social aspects, environmental concerns, government issues, and economic dimensions. This and the next slide provides a number of most popular definitions of smart cities. And in the second slide, there are a number of definitions of what smart city is. I will, rather than repeating them, which you can read it on the slides, I will jump onto the last one, which is my interpretation of what smart city is or should be. To my view, it should be the ideal form to build sustainable cities of the century. And that requires basically balancing and sustainable view, bringing together economic, societal, environmental, and institutional development domains to form a fair, equitable, and human-friendly environment. Keeping these conceptual aspects in mind, the empirical part of the presentation focuses on addressing our overall research question of whether smart cities lead to sustainable outcomes. In terms of practicality of addressing these research questions, I have formed two sub-research questions. First of them is focusing on whether urban smartness brings sustainability in terms of CO2 emissions, and the second one is whether this impact changes over time. In terms of the study context, I have chosen the United Kingdom. This is mainly because UK is, as a nation, one of the first adopters of the smart city concept in its local plan making process, and secondly, London and Bristol's being one of the world's successful smart city locations. Within this context, I have selected 15 cities with comprehensive smart city initiatives. These are listed on the slide. This slide illustrates the variables of the empirical analysis. I have used CO2 emissions as a representative of the sustainable development for the empirical study. In terms of urban smartness, city smartness, I have used a number of websites and IP addresses from these cities. I have also introduced some socio-economic indicators, variables, which is GDP per capita, and also a number of urban form indicators are also used in the study. Green area per person, population density, urban sprawl, and polycentricity. In terms of methodological approach, we have used three statistical methods. The first one is the pool regression model. Second is two-way fixed effect panel data model. And the third one is random effect panel data model. To save you from boredom, I'm skipping the details of those models. This is the summary table of the results, and I will discuss the findings in the next few slides. The empirical findings, particularly in terms of urban form and CO2 emission, indicates that in sprawling cities, CO2 emissions are much higher. And this is also a fact for the polycentricity, that polycentric development in urban areas has a positive impact on reducing CO2 levels. The study hasn't found a correlation and association between the amount of green space in the cities and the CO2 emissions. And one of the main reasons for that is that the type of green space in cities, turf and recreational green spaces, as opposed to young green natural forest areas, has a different level of oxygen emissions. Therefore, further investigation on the type of the green space is required. When we look at the socioeconomic effects, we found that as cities and citizens are getting wealthier, the CO2 emissions are increasing. In terms of time effects, greenhouse gas emissions are reducing over time in the UK cities, given that we control the socio-economic urban form and these factors. In terms of city smartness and carbon dioxide emissions, particularly the 5 UK cities constantly maintain their ranking. These are Bristol, Cardiff, Leeds, Liverpool, and Nottingham. And the ranking has shown variations for the rest of the 10 cities when we're concerned of IP addresses and websites. For all cities, 15 cities, CO2 emissions gradually declined from 2005 to 2013. And the upper quartiles of the smartness classification in terms of IP addresses show higher figures than other classes throughout the period. In terms of hosted websites and CO2 relationships, when cities are classified, there is a different trend occurred. This slide illustrates the relationships between CO2 emissions and city smartness quartiles in terms of, on the left, IP addresses, and on the right, websites hosted. There is a constant decline on the CO2 emissions in all UK cities, and this is indicating an overall declining trend. This mainly might be as a result of efforts of achieving sustainability, irrespective of the smartest status of the cities. Another finding is that the time has an impact on the CO2 emissions. So this might be due to the sustainability issues and policies and creating awareness among the society. Another key finding is that the study hasn't found clear pattern of effects of city smartness on CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions are declining, but this is most likely due to policy of sustainable urban development rather than smart city initiatives. Another finding highlights the relationships, which is significant between city smartness and CO2 emissions, but this relation seems to be, in statistical terms, a U-shaped relationships. And there is no temporal effect of city smartness on CO2 emissions, meaning that there is a declining trend. This is the graphical representation of the U-shaped relationships mentioned in the earlier slide, highlighting the heterogeneity of CO2 emissions in terms of IP address classifications. In terms of conclusions, a positive correlation exists between technology adoption and sustainable outcomes. And the impact of urban smartness on CO2 emissions changes over time. And unfortunately, while UK cities are promising smart city practices, but they have failed to make a significant contributions to the sustainability agenda beyond rhetorical contributions. In terms of the findings, the research also highlights prospective empirical investigations to more precisely understand the correlation between technology use and sustainable outcomes. Beyond this, the further investigation is needed to clearly understand the strategies of smart cities and how they can create concrete sustainable outcomes. Another aspect of the smart city agenda requires its outcomes to be aligned with sustainability, sustainable development policies and their outcomes. And that requires future investigation as well. Lastly, smart city paradigm is still it's in infancy. The maturation of this paradigm is potentially will help city planning and development to provide prosperous outcomes, not only for our communities and cities, but for the everyone in the globe, and including flora and fauna. And this is just the beginning of an era that we are not only becoming smarter in terms of technology use, but we should be getting wiser in terms of making the right decisions and using correct tools and methods to achieve sustainable outcomes for all. For those who are interested in further investigation and references in the field of sustainable development and smart cities, I recommend my latest book, 2016 book from Routledge, Technology and the City, looking at systems, applications and implications of technology for the development of our cities, societies and the planet. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations and the summer school. All the best. Ciao.